Welcome to Come Together. It's so great to see everyone gathering today. Welcome, great to see you, Lynn, John, Barbara, Monique, everyone, Katia, Lucy, David, Becky. Oh, it's just great to read. It's great to see everyone's face. It turned out to another beautiful day here in our sort of fall weather. So we're looking forward to a wonderful evening together as we come together as community in celebration. The CLNE again processes. We begin with this time of this gathering, centering ourselves. I invite you to position your bodies, enter into this space as we center ourselves. And our process is one of where we welcome everyone, again, centering ourselves and welcome safety and belonging. We are all community together and just deepening that sense of community. And we also begin our time with this centering with reflection on our land acknowledgement. And as before we begin the land acknowledgement, just remember that we'll go through a process of this welcoming, centering time, the land acknowledgement, recognizing the land that we're on, and then we'll have a centering time of some photos and some music, centering ourselves around the experience that is the topic and the opportunity for our reflection today. I'll say a little bit more about that after we have our land acknowledgement. And then after the reflection time, we will then enter into our breakout. And I want to, again, always center that our breakout time is, it's not just filler time, it's a critical time of our, it's a critical point of our time together and our centering and the breakout, a time that to be somatic, to really involve ourselves in conversation, and remember that perhaps the deepest time of our time together is the time that we're in breakout and sharing that reflection, again, centering welcome, safety, and belonging, and that connection. So with that, let's enter into our acknowledgement of the land that we are on, recognizing that as we gather tonight, asking the question, how do we build true relationships across differences? We acknowledge the sacred lands on which we stand. So the Center for Leadership and Neighbor Engagement is located on the ancestral homeland of the Dakota people. We're in close proximity to the territories of the Anishinaabe and the Ho-Chunk peoples. This land has been stewarded as a living relative by the Dakota for generations. The United States government effectively stole this land from the Dakota people through a series of unjust treaties and broken promises, followed by targeted genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced removal. For this, we repent and commit to doing better. So we look now to the Dakota people and all Native American communities as examples of resilience, resistance, and strength. And we're grateful to have this opportunity to learn and to work in this community on this territory. So as we enter into conversations of racial justice tonight, let us remain mindful of the broken covenants and commit to building trust in all our relations. So as we enter this time of reflection and centering, our focus tonight is a conversation with Manny Lewis, Kendrick Hall, and Jen Mohr on an immersion experience that they had when we went to Montgomery, Alabama and Selma, Alabama on an immersion experience. And as we center ourselves in the reflection will be with some pictures and a soundtrack. We remember that an immersion experience is really where we put our full bodies into our whole selves into a deeper experience. And an immersion is different from a service trip or a tour. And so really want to center on what immersion means. I think of immersion, I think of our Baptist brothers and sisters that when they baptize, they don't sprinkle, they go into the full immersion experience. And so let's maybe think about, when we think about immersion, maybe think about that also as a time of baptism, a full immersive experience. And so let's center ourselves for a time of reflection with picture and song. Our reflection for tonight is based on Just Mercy Immersion that we had, where 11 from Minnesota went to Montgomery, Alabama and Selma, Alabama, again, as an immersive experience. And just a little of that highlight was a Just Mercy visit to the Equal Justice Initiative with Brian you'll hear more from our reflection leaders. I'm really excited tonight that Kendrick Hall and Manny Lewis and Jennifer Mohr will be our reflection leaders, and a special acknowledgement to Richard Webb and Jen, who organized our Just Mercy experience. And for our speakers, Kendrick Hall and Jim Mohr will speak to their experience. Kendrick Hall is an amazing leader who grew up in North Minneapolis. He's been a resident of North Minneapolis his whole life, graduated from Minneapolis Public Schools, went on and graduated from Gus Davis College, and most recently graduated from Luther Seminary. And Jen Mohr has been an educator and the director for children's education at Westwood Lutheran Church in St. Louis Park, but she's also directed nonprofits and has a wealth of experience in education. Manny Lewis will be our interviewer today. And Manny is a young adult who has lived in North Minneapolis since he was a teenager and has worked at Breaking Bread and has other experience working with young people and working in our community. One of the things in framing this with Manny, I don't think Manny's ever been to the South. And Manny will be interviewing, and so questions that Manny has come up with to interview Kendrick and Jen. And now I'll get out of the way and let the real action begin.
Hello, how are you guys?
Well, hello, Manny.
Doing good, doing good.
All right, so the first question I have is, what stereotypes did you have going into this experience?
Yeah, I'll start.
All right.
Since Jen was leading the organization and did a great job organizing that. When I went into it, I thought that we'll be doing everything and like getting to meet Brian Stevenson and him speaking with us and letting us know about the initiative.
Mhm.
I didn't think that we'll be doing anything outside of the Equal Justice Initiative. When I first thought about it, you know, I've read the book, and when I think about Just Mercy, I think about Brian Stevenson and the work that he's done. And so I thought we were going to be able to meet like his staff and mentors and things like that. And so, yeah.
I'd say the stereotype or the thing I went into it thinking, I went into it thinking I'm going to recognize that I'm from Minnesota and that my story doesn't connect to the stories that I'm hearing being in the Deep South. And I was aware of that going into it, but also realized like that would be the work to connect it, because you know the same thread that they're working through in Georgia are things that we're experiencing here with the murder of George Floyd and all the things that we know we're dealing with in the Minneapolis area.
Okay. And how were those stereotypes transformed during your experience?
Man, you know, going in and meeting Alton at Alterna, meeting Michelle Crowder. When we first get in there, she takes us to the river and we learned about slavery and the transportation and the auctions, going to Richard Harris' house, Dr. Richard Harris' house, and learning about the history there. And then also going to the Selma, for the Voter Rights Museum, and talking with Sam Walker, and just meeting great people who were all present during the time of the Civil Rights Movement, during the Freedom Rides, and during the Selma marches. It was just beautiful being able to be present with people who experienced and witnessed all the things going on during that time, and just how they put everything in perspective, and just was brought into that space. And it was just very enlightening and very humbling at the same time.
Yeah, I would honestly say like some of the fact like you could go and see a road called Red Line Lane, right? Or like what was it, like
White Boulevard.
White Boulevard. Okay, so I mean, there's something about it being so out there and so obvious. And then the pieces like we're doing just as much harm, and especially more dangerous in the fact that we're not saying the things that are real in Minnesota, right? This is the Minnesota nice passive aggressive danger that we've created here. And so to see it so obvious, and then to see how these amazing Black leaders see the truth. Yeah, so when you get to meet Michelle Browder, I recommend it. She is like a visionary. She's an amazing Black leader in Alabama. And then she just like sears right to your heart. She recognized like, there's no messing around with this. Like, this is what's actually happening. And then that what she kept saying, if you see it, you'll be set free. And so the truth telling and being honest and real, and dealing with the feelings that come up. I mean, it was really powerful because as a group, there were white women and Black men here, and we knew that the experience would be different for all of us, but also the power to be able to debrief that and talk about it. I want to give a big shout out. Richard Webb is maybe with us today somewhere out there. And without Richard Webb and the way that he's been guiding us over the years to do this type of an immersion, it takes it away from being a place where I can just keep my stereotypes and keep myself like boxed into what I learned. And it cracked open this realization that like, unless I own the truth and I sit with the truth, there's no way to change moving forward, because I'm just going to be living in this fake land. So thanks, Richard.
All right, thank you, Richard. So you go down and you start getting your experience, and it's different, and you had one way of thinking going in, and then now you're experiencing something different. So what part of this experience has invoked both of you to take action in present time today when you came back? And what type of action?
When we were sitting with Alton, he expressed the difference between institutional violence and reactionary violence, and that institutional violence is the root cause to reactionary violence, but we always see reactionary violence as the root cause. And it's like, being in poverty, growing up in a poor economic situation, and you don't expect a person to do something desperate just to get by, to make ends meet, sell drugs, or sell their bodies, or whatever they need to do. That's reactionary violence. Whereas it's the institutional that actually, policies and leaders who created the kind of situation that people live in. And we always are quick to blame the person doing the reaction rather than the institutional violence. So that's one thing that changed my perspective here. Just like, how can we change the narrative, as PK was saying, and to talk about the institutional violence rather than the reactionary violence. And then there's this repressive violence that people who are affected by reactionary violence, they want to push policies that affects the people who are in the reactionary violence rather than going to the root cause, which is the institutional violence. So figuring out an initiative to change how we see the narrative, how we write the narrative, and how we engage in the narrative is one thing. Then also just hearing how the initiative between the undocumentable, like Alton was saying, when they go through a situation, they have a collaborative work together, kind of a piece economically. Whereas when Black people get a ticket or going through policing, they feel like they can't call out to one another or receive help financially to do that. And so hopefully building an initiative that will start getting those affected by policing and policies and getting tickets and stuff, that there will be more unity amongst us, so we can have more unity amongst the human family. There's more I can share, but I'm just going to Dr. Richard Harris' house and hearing Valda Harris Montgomery, and just seeing how the operations were being held with King and James Meredith and Diane Nash and Rosa Parks and many other great leaders in that space, how they, if they did not receive what they needed from the government or from that society, predominantly for white people in that space, they did it themselves. And they didn't just wait around and wait for some miracle to happen by a nation that did not accept them. They still had their own initiative, but they still worked towards equality to be recognized and respected as human beings on the American soil. And when I look at today, I have many conversations with people in the struggle and doing the movement. It's always a response to what has been done to them instead of what we are doing for ourselves. And so hopefully getting people to see that we got to build and fight. They were building and fighting. You know, it wasn't just one and the other. And when I was advocating for Jamal Clark, it was a lot of fighting, but there was no building. And so hopefully there'll be more building and fighting at the same time.
Okay, that's great. Woo! I'll just speak to my white perspective. I mean, I grew up assuming because of white supremacy and the way that the news and like everything that I am is a product of white supremacy and how that gets shaped as a child and growing into it. And so I grew up believing that Black and brown bodies were not as capable, right? Because I'd look at poverty and I'd say, why don't you pull the bootstrap? All these things now that we realize are like the shaping and the way white supremacy holds tight. What was so powerful is that, in these spaces, and my gosh, I mean, we're sitting in the same spot where Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. had his butt. I mean, it was just like, that is the holiest chair I've ever seen.
I sat on the floor where James Meadow sat.
Woo! I mean, you get like, woo, it's just like all these, vibes and energy going on. But also, I mean, so what you were saying, like the community and owning that my ancestors worked really hard in such extreme, horrible, terror-filled ways to break that. I mean, you think of the Tulsa Massacre, you think of all the efforts white people have made to make sure that there's dominance. And then what was so inspiring is looking at these leaders. I mean, Michelle Browder, Dr. Montgomery, like these are women, Bobby Hart, like these are women that have lived it, seen it. And then the community that they were built. I mean, the way Dr. Montgomery was just like, I didn't know anything different. And her dad was the pharmacist, so he would be helping the ones from the Freedom Riders that were beaten, and it was just part of the life, and of course, really good spaghetti. Like, she's like, yeah, and the food matters too.
Yes.
But just that community, the Black community in the place where white oppression shows up is like the part of whiteness that I realize that I miss as a person, right? Because I think in white supremacy, I'm also taught to be an individual, and community is dangerous, and don't lean on each other because you don't know what's going to happen, because so many good things can happen. So getting into spaces like this where we're listening to the stories and we're learning how to be together differently and working in that truth, that was what I felt like I was witnessing, as these leaders sharing like, this is what it can be. And then Michelle Browder, I mean, she's an artist, she's a welder, she has, she made us dinner, she's going to build a community center. Like, yeah, leadership, strength, community, resiliency. It was so impactful to see that and witness it. So.
Okay. So during your experience and then thinking about back in those days, let's put it that way, right?
Yeah.
So you go back to those days and you're like, okay, now I see how this was. And you come back to today, so we're gonna time travel a little bit. What do you feel like correlates from what you learned back then till today?
Yeah, I'm feeling a little sparky right now. So the Legacy Museum is built from taking us from slavery and enslaved Black folk, and then making the thread all the way to incarceration. And I know in my white mind, it's this feeling of needing it to be proven, right? So that if I could understand it better versus just knowing and believing because it's true, right? Like needing to hear it and see it. And so that was the thread, like the way that I got to learn history again, pulling back the layers of white supremacy and learning inclusive, truthful history. It became so obvious. And I think that was one of the big pieces where we debriefed a ton, is just like, this is true history. This is how we need to know it so that we do change it, right? Because we just talk about incarceration now and it's a big mess and but it has roots that we have webbed into being and made it really difficult to break it. But I think as a white person, for me, I I needed to hear that and spend time in that because I tend to compartmentalize time. And then I've learned over time, like history is layered, right? It's all the swirling mix. And so having the space to kind of sit in history from then and now and seeing how it continues. You didn't ask how I was going to change it though, right? Because that wasn't okay, you're just saying the timeline. Yeah, that was real powerful.
You said the question again?
Yeah.
Just making sure that
So
I did it.
with your experience, right?
Mhm.
With everything that you learned in that time, stay in that time, right?
Mhm.
And look at everything that was happening in your life. Then jump all the way to today, right? How does it correlate
Yeah.
with what's going on in life for you now?
When you, we can talk about policing, when policing a community, whenever, the Black community of that time was trying to strive to be better and have better, there was always a group of people such as the KKK or, then you have laws like Jim Crow and things like that. And, even when you look at today, the policing that, is in a certain community, like when I'm driving around North Minneapolis, I see, what is it called, roundabouts in the center and heart of the community, not on main roads like they do in suburb communities, but in the center of like, off-street block. And that's just showing me that that's policing, instead of providing the funds economically to help the conditions in this community, you rather do means in which that is going to police the community, which is like an identity of criminalization. And that's something that you see throughout the wording throughout history, from the time of slavery, Reconstruction, lynching era, to segregation era up to now. It's always criminalizing a group of people rather than seeing that you are actually hurting these people by forcing certain policies on them and forcing them to react in that policy, and them not being able to have the proper boots and straps to get themselves out of it, right? Another thing is that when you think about separating the families, they started doing that during slavery. And when we think about today, when a mother, if a father is trying his best in the streets to sell drugs and do something for his family, he's criminalized because he's selling drugs. And if he gets caught, he goes to jail. Or he's trying to protect his family, he kills someone, he goes to jail or gets a death penalty. Now the father is removed from the home. And then the mother is struggling trying to take care of the child, and if she's not adequate enough to take care of that child, the state will come take the child away from them. But you can give money to people who adopt children, but you can't give money to the people who are struggling to take care of their children. And so it's like this reoccurring act that is happening on through it. Just, it's repeating itself. History is repeating itself again and again. And so if we can't see clearly, like to say in my shirt, see the truth, we can't even speak about that. Why can't we give people who are struggling the adequate needs, the equitable needs to take care of their children, but it's the system working. That's the racism that exists in the institution. That's the institutional violence that exists. And it's been perpetuated out throughout history.
Okay. Personal question. Take race all the way out of this. You're not white, you're not Black, but you are going to talk about just you, right? So from this experience that you both had, what generational curse do you think that you could break? Take a second to think about it, because it's strictly about you and your lives.
As a human being, I've seen how when we're dealing with pain, we turn to other substances to numb that pain. Drugs, alcohol, and things like that. I've been having a conversation with my uncle about the generational curse we have with my family, which they turn to substance abuse as a way of coping with things. And that's something that me and my uncle have discussed, and he's done a great job in not even being a part of that. And that's something that I've been readdressing in my life. I grew up in a community where drugs and alcohol is very much accessible, even when you're just a teenager, and when you're looking up to the older kids, that's the fun thing to do. And so it's like something that it's like, oh, it's the act of being cool in society rather than being yourself, and so removing that curse, being clean, and actually that save me some economic trouble that I might be in today. So economically, I might be in a better place than if I was, if I didn't go try to get a bottle or some wine and have a good time. So, yeah.
Picking out race is tricky because
It
the two answers I have are about white silence and color blindness. So
Shoot.
can I go there? Can I go
Yeah,
there?
let's go.
Okay. So one of my reflections, and this is based off of, something about seeing the colored versus the white only, colored only and the white only spaces. I mean, and then I keep thinking about when I was a kid, manners meant colorblind, right? Because if you talked about difference, you were being rude. And so you'd be shush, you'd be like, don't do that, which then as a white kid, you learn that must mean it's not good, right? And so I feel like that must have been a pendulum swing. And I've been reading a little bit about like the manners of racism, right? How do you perpetuate it with manners? And the manners swinging from colored and white only, right? Jim Crow era was to be colorblind, to say it doesn't exist and swing it that way. And so one thing that, I feel like as a parent and just having a little chance to keep pushing things along, at least in one household, is to talk about color and race and to normalize it. As much as I say black, I say white, right? Like that is part of the learning. And then the second thing I was going to share, oh man, I offered it and then I lost it. Ooh, it must have been real good. If it comes back later, I'll bring it back. Maybe.
Okay, it's okay. So we go back. So you're in the South, and we're gonna go back to the Just Mercy. We're gonna travel back in time again, right? And we're looking at everything, and you see how they're living life. What's one thing that you didn't think changed that you witnessed that has changed today?
I mean, we can sit in the restaurant and get us a meal without telling us to get kicked out. I can drink from the same fountain, water fountain that is clean, look cleaner than the Negro water fountain, than the white only water fountain. Yeah, I'll say that's just about it.
I think that's a really good solid.
Okay, we can keep that one, right? So let's go off script. All right, so we're back here and you've experienced everything that these people have went through, right? So as you do the work and you be the work, how do you implement that into the work now from what you've learned? Because you still walk outside tomorrow. You're a Caucasian woman and you're still gonna walk outside and look through your rearview mirror for the police because you're an African-American man. So with what you learned, how are you going to offer it to the world?
By what I'm doing right now, sharing the story, telling the story, create spaces where we can talk about the history, and discuss how we can move forward. And that'll be with youth, elders, and adults. What I saw is that we need to do it together. When we sat with Walter Montgomery, we got to see how her as a child was being transformed into who she became as she got older. And so her doing the work became so easy because it was a part of her life. And she was doing that as a child. And then you had people who were teenagers and young adults who put their lives and bodies on the line, sacrificed themselves during the freedom rides because they believed in equality. They believed in being respected and recognized as human beings. And then you had the elders who were there guiding and mentoring and showing the youth the proper way of doing the nonviolent strategy and bringing a spiritual front so strong that, it's like everyone was together. And so we have this gap now between the very young, the young, and the elders. And it's like, it sounded then that it wasn't really there like that. It's like they had some sense of unity in that time that does not exist today. So hope today, the hope is to be that gap and not that gap, but be that bridge, between the young adults and the elders today. And when we see together, we can believe together and we can fight together and hopefully build some equality and justice together, because young folks have the energy, the old folks have the wisdom. And now we just need to put it all together and make it happen. And they were doing that during the civil rights movement. That's what I would love to see today.
Good stuff. I mean, as a white person, I think for me, it's just keeping conversation going in the white community. I think, I look at my kids, I'm curious, I'm always asking them, what are they learning in social studies? Because I want to hear that there's change happening, and I don't know that that's keeping up with the pace that it needs to. Obviously, historically, that's been always true. But I think also for me, I find myself saying like, oh, white people, Black people, and I need to keep finding myself in the narrative, and I need to keep owning my own upbringing and historical experience as a white person and dig into that. I think that's the stuff I'm most likely to avoid. I'd rather go do something or, fix something and for me, I think my challenge will always be to go inward and learn why this is why it is for me, like keep coming back to that.
Yes.
And then hear this information, listen to my body response, listen to where I don't believe it. I mean, there were times we'd read these, you'd read like a plaque and it was like, I'd read it and then Michelle Browder would say, what doesn't it say? And I didn't know that. And that was the thing, is like, I'm a learner forever on this. I've got 40 years in, I got 40 years to go maybe before I start balancing out what I came up into this place understanding. And so just that humility and that edge to keep that joyous discomfort, because it does feel, there's lots of great leaders, get your reps and get in that place. But I think white folks have to push each other to stay there because that's not our natural place. And so experiences like this and having places to learn how to be vulnerable, because I haven't been very vulnerable. So getting into that.
Perfect. Perfect. So last question. Let's go to fairy tale land.
Ooh.
Okay, so with what you know now, the word outcome, what would be the perfect outcome for you?
Yeah, I go, yeah. The outcome is, I would say a couple. One, when I was in Nigeria, I got to see the same thing that I experienced at Dr. Richard Harris' house. The separation of our community, though we were being institutionally and systematically oppressed, there was a creation, a foundation that was set. We owned businesses. We had our own structures and things like that going on, though we wasn't properly being respected. When I was in Nigeria, I got to see them doing their own operations and own their own businesses. But when I come back, in the South, it may be a little different, but when I come back here, I don't see the conglomeration of Black businesses working together, providing economic means to those who are suffering in the Black community or any community. But you'll see that with Asian restaurants, with Hispanic restaurants, and Indian restaurants, and so forth and so on. I DoorDash right now, and you'll go to a Mali Mart, where Somalis have a central location where you can shop. You have a Hispanic location where you can specifically shop. You got Chinatown, but when it comes to being Black in this society, we don't have anything. We have to go operate and do things amongst others and not amongst ourselves. And so necessarily there's no Black foundation, there's no Black wealth in that. And that's something that I see we continue to suffer to do. So if we can get a large plot of land and build a conglomerate of businesses where we can provide economic opportunity to those who are less fortunate, because they're going through a system that has a racist practice that exists, and it's a lot harder for you to get a job, or you got a record and it's harder for you to get a job. And so I would love to see that for us, as well as also, there was also this piece where, people were working together during the movement, white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, and so forth. And so they all believed in justice and equality, and just to call out saying, hey, if you did not like what you saw during Bloody Sunday, come out and join us. And many people drove miles to go join them. Didn't matter your race or your age or anything, people joined. And that's what I would love to also see, is us join together in the belief for freedom and for justice and for equitable means for everyone, because we're going through an economic crisis right now. And we all can agree when it comes to the economic crisis, but when it comes to racism and how it affects primarily Black and brown bodies, we still have a hard time coming together. So I would love to see that. That's why
You should be a preacher. Yeah, I feel like utopia, like the future, it's just white leadership needs to realize that there's something missing. I mean, even just getting to be on a team that is Black and white bodies, like white supremacy is limiting white bodies from experiencing so many amazing ways to lead and so many ways to be community that we don't experience. And so the more I learn, the more I realize I don't have the answers, and y'all do, right? Like, so the leadership is there, and for white bodies to know, like, it is our responsibility, because we have power and privilege, to get out of the way and to open our minds to how we actually can co-lead, we can support. Like, there's just so much in that. And, I feel like I'm just dabbling into that, just even getting to be with you on staff and learning how to be a team. There's so much there that I think, I think the supremacy is built to prevent it. And that's the thing that white folks own to keep dismantling and push to happen.
Thank you, Jen, Kendrick. Wonderful. One of the things that come together, it's not about being experts, it's about sharing our experience. And one of the foundations that we aspire, commit to, is that white people hear from Black and brown bodies. And so there's not enough of that. So thank you for your wonderful response and sharing. And Manny, thank you for incredible questions. And
I got a couple of reflection questions.
yeah, okay. Well, at this time, we will transition into the reflection questions. And what are they, Manny?
All right, so for reflection, the same as I asked them, one would be, think to yourself, how could you take action to try to break generational curses that'll help the society? Does that make sense?
Okay, so in our breakout, what can you do to break the generational curse that will improve our society? So that's one question. And the backdrop for that, the other questions that we had. Team, can you put up the other questions for the breakout? This is the time for our breakout day 2. So the breakouts are 20 minutes. How can you take action and try to break the generational curses that will help society? What can you do to break the generational curse? What stories connected with you? And what jumped out for you? And finally, what challenged you? So with 20 minutes for a breakout time, and we'll reconvene in 20 minutes.
Where'd he go? There he is.
Where an issue then can come to that community and the community takes it up together, that isn't so much true in the white community. That is really a piece of truth we have to own, right? And we talked at some length about how do we particularly in our white church communities, how do we break down that wall and create networks that are inclusive, right? That not only embrace the attitudes and so forth that people bring with them into that single space, but that reach across to create a stronger network. So we talked about community and the importance of developing community.
Thank you, Katia. And I want to especially thank you and invite it's powerful when we speak from I statements as well. So when we share a reflection and speak with an I statement, we appreciate that. Invite that. Thank you.
Richard has his hand raised.
Richard?
Yeah, if I'm okay, to just respond to, is it Katia? Did I pronounce your name correctly? So, one of the things going on the immersion is, in hearing the comments earlier, it wasn't so much that because I know Jen talked about being individual, and what I was noticing there and noticing here is that actually the white community does come together, but which white community are you talking about? And so, in this political season, people who are utilizing the tools of white supremacy to support policy and practice are very much mobilized. And if we look at the most recent presidential election, to the tune, of over 50 something million people. So I wouldn't say that the white community isn't mobilizing, it isn't together. It's, what types of communities and how are they utilizing whiteness to function to, oppress, reinforce, power and sustain racial disparities and disproportionality, and really cultural disparities and disproportionality, which was also evidenced, in, looking at the Equal Justice Initiative, and looking at, kind of the historical timeline and what was communicated in Dr. Valda Harris Montgomery's In Her House, when she talked about, having separate communities and, how the Black community in a segregated situation was mobilizing, to be seen in a humanistic way, and then also eliminate policies and practices from a united, white community, in Alabama and Georgia and in the South.
Thanks, Richard. Carolyn put in the chat too that something we can do immediately is share our story about tonight or what we heard and felt and saw. I extrapolated a little bit there, Carolyn. Sorry to put words in your mouth. Any other thoughts, questions, reflections? Otherwise, I can start calling out breakout rooms too. Oops. Is it Diane? Diane?
Just a minute.
There we
Hi, good evening, everyone. So one of the questions I think we were to consider was, what can we do? What will I do, basically, to Reverend Chapman's direction? What can I do? And as I've said before, I've only lived in Minnesota 7 years, but I've lived in other cultures before I moved here. And I think that I can continue to speak a truth that we as Americans deny. And I love to tell the story of my ancestors. And so I mentioned in our group where we had our breakout that, basically for Black Americans, white people created us. And I mean that by, we were my grandparents, my mother, my father, we all have some genetic connection to all of you. And it's a more recent genetic connection, not the one that we found in the woman in Africa. And so for people to not tell that truth, that's one big lie that we live with every day, and white people don't acknowledge it. A lot of Black people don't acknowledge it. And I think that we need to tell the truth about how the whole truth about who we are as a people collectively. And so I know that for me, it's always when I say things about that, people are surprised. And so I want to acknowledge that my family had difficulty with that. So I personally ask white people to look a little deeper, just look a little deeper in your history and our history. I just went to see Tom and Sally. Did anybody see that? So anyway, I'm done.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. So 2 things. One is, just to clarify, come together is the intention of people coming together from wherever you're coming from, right? In terms of however you come. And the I statement is a kind of way of it's that embodiment of bringing yourself, speaking from your experience. The other thing that I think is helpful as we come together, because we're coming from different base of knowledge and experience, all of that. And the other thing is when we speak from how I feel. Yeah? So you think about, how did you feel during the discussion? How did you feel during the time of your breakout conversation? So that may be a more advising invitation to share your thought, to enter into the conversation. How did the conversation make you feel? Or how, not make you feel, how did you feel in the midst of what stirred for you?
I just want to say one other thing. It was something that that was said by one of the young men. I'm not sure that brought that up in me. That I had that visceral feeling from. I don't even remember exactly what you said, but I did. And from our conversation, I've been to Montgomery and Selma, and Birmingham. I've been there, I think 3 times now. And I want to go a 4th time because I just think it's important to go there. So anyway, so it brought back memories. I felt the feeling I had when I was there and was told, I spoke to my group and said, we were told not to go. I don't know if you guys heard about Green Valley when you were there. I think it's Green Valley or Green something, was where all the white people moved during the civil rights movement and when they closed the schools in Selma. And I asked, can we go there? And this docent at the museum at the bottom of the bridge said, don't go there. It's not safe to go there.
Diane,
Yes.
you wasn't supposed to hear that. But how are you today? I am currently trying to connect you with the 2 workers. I was texting. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. It's okay. It's fine. You guys are amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
So we just have a couple more minutes. Maybe would anybody speak? Oh, thank you, Nancy.
Nancy has her hand raised.
Go ahead, Nancy.
She has to unmute. I asked her to now, but it's a process.
Okay, well, I just wanted to respond to PK's last remark. I was in Diane's group, and first of all, I feel like God placed me in that group without my even asking, because after last month, I heard Diane speak and I thought, oh, I want to know more about her. And then she showed up in my group and I thought, okay, this is God's hand. But I felt intensely grateful to be in company with someone from the Black community who would share their feelings with me and let me just listen, because I feel isolated and though I learn well by reading, and I learn well by studying with my other Black or other white people, there's nothing that's more valuable to me than being in community to learn from BIPOC people. So I felt really grateful, and that's why I feel so lucky to be here tonight. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Nancy.
I don't know if Kendrick, Manny, or Jen, any final?
I mean, if anybody have any questions.
Yeah, I'm open to questions,
I'm
but
open to questions.
you got a hand raised.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Richard's got his hand raised again. Oh, does Anne have her physical hand raised and I'm just not seeing it?
yeah.
Oh, where are you, Anne? There you are, Anne. I just asked you to unmute.
Oh, I see. I needed the invitation. Thank you. I've been in Minnesota for 50 years now, but I grew up in Maryland and North Carolina. And one of the things that struck me, I really appreciated seeing the pictures from your immersion experience. So thank you very much for sharing those. It was powerful. I knew that we had those men from Duluth represented there, and it was powerful to actually see it. I've wanted to go ever since I heard that. Someday I hope I can. But having grown up in Maryland and North Carolina, one of the first things that struck me when I saw the pictures of the group was there's 3 Black men and 7 or 8 women. And it's like, holy cow, that wouldn't have happened when I was growing up. For you to have that learning experience together, to eat and be in accommodations together. So that was my experience. And I wondered if that was part of your experience that you maybe didn't have time to share.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I made a comment on the drive to Selma, Alabama. I didn't make it until we was already in Selma, but I drove to Selma from Montgomery, and PK sat in the passenger seat, and then we had all the white women in the back seat. And it was just like, you know, if we got pulled over, what would be the response of seeing 2 Black men in the front seat and the white women in the back seat? You know, how would that be, especially being in Montgomery, where the racial kind of like strife is still very high, at least what I hear from people I know in Alabama, you know. But, you know, it's just a thought process that went through my head, learning all the history and things like that. It's just like, okay, what it would be like if we got pulled over and they saw the situation, you know.
I called it driving Miss Daisies.
There were a lot of us. Wasn't there even a thing where Michelle Browder shared that she had a tour bus of white folks come out, and then
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember the storyline, but basically this CEO, remember this? And he came down, Michelle Browder was in her trolley, and then everyone thought that this white man that was, I don't know if he was doing racial slurs or what he was doing, but she stood up against him and was very clear that they were not going to leave. And all the white people that were there started clapping because they thought it was a act. And it was true, real in the moment of racism. And so yeah, we changed our driving. That was part of our trip, was the conversations about driving.
But yeah. That was it. It's very surreal if you think about what it was like 50 years ago. And we were traveling in community. And that wasn't just our group, but I think it merits to say something about Brian Stevenson and what he's done with the Equal Justice Initiative. and that is a different narrative about the development, Black development, an amazing museum, Black and brown people telling their story. So it is it's a wonderful witness to the dedication and faith and leadership that is a new future. And one of the things I loved about it was the museum is a wonderful state-of-the-art museum telling a very painful story, but it's the employment of Black and brown people running the organization and telling this story. And so it is a very much a new narrative, but it doesn't deny the old narrative. And so holding those in tension is a wonderful, wonderful witness that is attracting people from all over the country and the world. And I hadn't thought of it this way, but into community. And when I think about Just Mercy and the Equal Justice Initiative is a powerful witness. And it's also a powerful immersion. So as we bring closure to tonight, one of the things at CLNE that we're committed to is future immersion opportunities, not just in the South, but here in Minneapolis. And when James Meredith was here a year ago, he referred to being in Minneapolis as the other Selma. And so the opportunity for us and the challenge for us to see that reality that we traveled to Georgia to see how it's also reality that we're navigating and challenged to address here in the Twin Cities and beyond. So thank you all. Our time is almost up. We've got 5 minutes and we're not quite sure about our program for next month, but we're really, really fortunate. It may be Dr. Richard Webb, but for now, we invite you coming up, Redeemer Center for Life, which is a nonprofit ministry of Redeemer Lutheran Church doing inclusive development in Northern. They have their gala on February the 4th at the Capri Theater. The Capri Theater is an amazing theater on Broadway that has been redeveloped in a wonderful venue. So it's an opportunity if you have the time and the resource, it would be great to see you at that. CLNE is sponsoring a table. So if you want to know more, please consider that as an opportunity for you. We also have Minnesota's Racial Legacy. It's finally telling the truth. The Minnesota Council of Churches, November 5th from 9 to 3 o'clock, a white church truce at Westminster Presbyterian Church. That's November the 5th from 9 to 3. Seems like there's also an immersion opportunity, weathering at the Penumbra Theater, November the 5th. That's also November the 5th at the Penumbra Theater. But we want to invite people to participate at the Penumbra, and we would like to follow that with a reflection discussion following the performance on November the 5th. I think that may be our offerings, and wonderful to see you all. Thank you for your time and continue to build this community coming together. So I invite you to say good evening to one another, and just wonderful to see you all again. God's blessing. Thank you all.
Bound in jail, had no money for
Bobby.
the bail. Keep your
Thank you.
eyes on the prize.
Hold on.